These tanks were developed to the British Cruiser tank role, and they were used in great numbers in the early years of World War II, contributing to the Allied victory in North Africa. Though they quickly became obsolete during the fighting and had many drawbacks, but they bridged the gap until the newer, heavier tanks like the Cromwell and the Sherman arrived. These were the Mark VI cruiser tanks, or as they better known, the A-15 Crusaders. So let's see the history of these vehicles today. To understand the history of the Crusader, first let's take a look at the British tank doctrine before World War II, and how the cruiser tank line, after many different designs, arrived to the Crusader model during the 1930s. In the interwar period, the British mainly aimed to use two different types of tanks. The slower, heavily armored infantry support tanks, good examples for these are the Matilda and later the Churchill tanks, and the faster, lighter, so-called cruiser tanks, usually equipped with high-velocity guns to attack enemy armor and to perform fast-moving operations. The cruiser tank specifications were laid out in the mid-1930s, after the disappointing performance of the earlier medium tank designs, like the medium Mark II and Mark III. The first model of the cruiser line was the A9 model, designed to the 1934 specification. The first A9 tanks were finished in April 1936, and they still use many features from the earlier failed medium Mark III design. They only had 14mm thick armor and carried the 40mm two-pounder gun, but thanks to their smaller size, they could reach a top speed of 25 miles an hour. Despite its shortcomings, especially the outdated suspension design, the A9 was ordered into limited production of 125 units as cruiser tank Mark I. Already in the same year, the updated A10 model appeared, which was basically an up-armored A9 featuring 30mm of armor. This improved its protection, but using the same 150 horsepower engine, the speed of this type was only 16 miles an hour, basically nullifying its advantage. Both of these models had numerous problems, but because of the urgent need for tanks, the A10 was also went into production and 170 units were ordered under the designation Cruiser Tank Mark II. Though the A9 and A10 were faster than the infantry tanks, like the Matilda one, they were not fast enough for the envisioned cruiser role. Aside of the weak engine, the other main problem with these tanks was their outdated suspension. But that changed on the next model, which by the time the A9 and A10 entered production was already in development. The British knew they needed a new and more advanced suspension design which can serve on their planned high-speed tanks. And interestingly, they found it in the Soviet Union. In 1936, during a visit to the Soviet Union, a British delegation was given a demonstration and witnessed the performance of the new BT tanks. They were shocked by the speed and maneuverability of these light tanks, and their suspension using large road wheels. This was the so-called Christie suspension, developed in the US by inventor Walter Christie. And as for how an American suspension design ended up in the Soviet Union and became the base for the BT tank series, I have already talked about this fascinating story in my earlier video covering the BT tanks. If you want to know more about them, check it out. After witnessing the performance of the new Soviet tanks, the British government authorized the purchase of a Christie M1931 model from the inventor. This vehicle was delivered from the US to the United Kingdom without a turret, labeled as an agricultural tractor. After its arrival, it received the designation A13E1, and during the following year, the vehicle underwent a series of trials. After the end of the trials, this model was sent to the Morris Car Company to be dismantled. By this time, Lord Nuffield, the head of the company, already bought the patent rights and created a new company, Nuffield Mechanization and Aero Limited, to develop a new tank design based on the Christie model. The first prototype of the new A13 model was already finished in 1937, and despite numerous teething problems, it showed great improvements over the A9 and A10 designs. It used Nuffield's own Liberty engine, developing 340 horsepower, a big step up from the earlier 150 horsepower engines, and of course a new suspension based on the Christie design. Thanks to these, the new vehicle could reach a top speed of 30 miles an hour. After the testing, the A13 Mark I model was ordered into production in January 1938 as cruiser tank Mark III, but this variant still only featured a maximum of 14mm armor thickness. So not long after, similarly as it happened with the A9 and A10 models, an up-armored version appeared, and the naming followed the usual confusing British customs. This variant, the A13 Mark II, entered production as Cruiser Tank Mark IV, and it featured 30mm maximum armor thickness. But now, thanks to the more advanced suspension and stronger engine, its speed remained the same 30 miles an hour. But for all intents and purposes, even this up-armored variant was just an interim solution, and the A13 was viewed as a light cruiser. Even before it entered production, in 1937 new specifications were laid out for a so-called heavy cruiser design, asking for 40mm armor protection, the 2-pounder gun, and 25 miles an hour off-road speed. But the two original designs, which were developed to these specifications, the A14 and A16, were found to be too expensive and not a real upgrade over the up-armored A13 model. So work on a new design started, designated A13 Mark III. London, Midland and Scottish Railway Company received a contract to work on the chassis, Nuffield to design the turret, and Meadows received the task to deliver the engine. This new model had a very low silhouette, thanks to the angled suspension components and the flat Meadows engine. In early 1939, in the rush to produce as many tanks as possible, as the situation in Europe started to look like a powder keg, this new design was accepted without trials as Cruiser Tank Mark V Covenanter, which as it turned out was a mistake. During 1940, the service trials of the first models revealed so many faults the Covenanter Mark II appeared very soon with improved cooling, then the Mark III with further improvements, and finally the Mark IV model. Though Nuffield was offered to participate in the production of the Covenanter, they didn't like the idea, and in parallel worked on their own design, which of course used their own Liberty engine, and offered it to the ministry in mid-1939 as the A15 design. Their new tank reused the drivetrain from the A13, but featured a new longer hull. It was heavier, with around 20-ton weight, and used 5 road wheels instead of 4 for better weight distribution. It used the same turret as the Covenanter, and featured the same 40mm armor thickness and the same 2-pounder gun. So it very much had the advantage of using as many already available parts as possible. On the original design, an auxiliary turret was used on the left side, and the driver had its own machine gun port, but both of these were deemed insufficient and made the tank too crowded, so they were later removed, leaving just a pistol port for the driver. Since the Nuffield design fit the specifications and used many already existing parts, a production order was given for pilot models and 200 production units in August 1939 under the name Cruiser Tank Mark VI Crusader. And actually, showing the efficiency of the design, the Crusader pilot model was finished before the Covenanter, despite a later start. The trials of the type started in March 1940, but by summer the same year the production order was already raised to 400 units, as the British Army needed tanks desperately, after losing a great number of vehicles and equipment in France. The experiences in France also showed the need for thicker armor and more powerful armament, which were introduced on later models of the type. And if we're talking about modifications, let's take a look at the Crusader variants now. The Crusader Mark I, or Cruiser Tank Mark VI, was the original version with 40mm armor thickness and the 2-pounder gun, featuring the auxiliary turret, though these were often removed on the field. It was followed by the Crusader Mark II, or Cruiser Tank Mark VI-A, with increased 49mm armor thickness and the updated Liberty Mark III engines. These variants still featured the machine gun turret, but similarly to the Mark I models, they were usually removed. The easiest way to identify a Mark II model is the gunner viewport on the turret, which is flush to the armor on the Mark II, but not on the Mark I. Both the Mark I and Mark II variants had close support versions, mounting a 3-inch howitzer in place of the original 2-pounder gun. After the experiences in France, and with the delays in the production of the new Cromwell tanks, the Crusader was again up-armored and up-gunned, creating the Crusader Mark III, or Cruiser Tank Mark VI-B variant. These models featured 51mm of maximum armor thickness and the new 57mm 6-pounder anti-tank gun. The crew was reduced to 3 men because the larger gun took up more space in the turret, and the useless auxiliary turret was finally deleted. They also received a new updated and more reliable Liberty Mark IV engine. Apart from the three main models, the Crusader also had command variants, gun tractor modifications, a tank recovery variant, and several anti-aircraft versions were also developed. The Mark I mounting a 40mm Bofors cannon, while the Mark II and Mark III were equipped with two 20mm Oerlikon cannons. The Crusader tank was 19 feet 8 inches long, 7 feet 4 inches wide, and 8 feet 8 inches tall. It featured 20 to 40mm thick armor plates on the half front and 28mm thickness on the sides. The turret featured 49mm thick armor on the front and 24mm on the sides. With this armor, the combat weight of the tank was around 19 tons altogether. Powered by the 27-liter Liberty engine, developing 340 horsepower, the tank could reach a top speed of 26 miles an hour on roads and 19 miles an hour off-road, and it had a range of around 200 miles. Its main armament was the 40mm 2-pounder gun, and its secondary armament consisted of two Besa machine guns. The Crusaders entered service in 1941, just in time to be shipped over to North Africa, where the Axis forces had the upper hand over the British at that time. They arrived to Africa in May, and they were a welcomed addition to the tank forces, replacing older types. But they had some serious problems right from the beginning, caused by the fast ramping up of the production, which caused quality problems. There was a shortage of spare parts, and the modifications made against the African heat and sand turned out to be insufficient. The modified Liberty engine driving the tanks suffered in the African heat, and the fans and water pumps were a constant cause for breakdowns. These mechanical problems caused a large number of tanks being out of action at all times, and despite the various official and field modifications, the Crusaders quickly built a bad reputation amongst the troops. They first saw action in Operation Battle Axe in June 1941, where they were used to flank the main Axis forces, but their attack was unsuccessful. Their 2-pounder gun was effective at first, and the Crusaders were more or less equally armored and armed as their German counterparts, like the early Panzer III models. But very soon, new German tank variants appeared, with increased armor protection and the long-barreled 50mm guns on the Panzer III models, and the 75mm ones on the Panzer IVs, making the life of the Crusaders extremely hard. But because of the delays on new tank designs, they had to keep fighting, which led to the development of the upgunned Mark III variant, which appeared in May 1942, featuring the 57mm 6-pounder gun. The Germans also used their anti-tank guns to great effect in Africa, and the British tanks with their solid shots were not effective against these gun placements. When facing a concentration of anti-tank guns, their only two options were the fighting retreat or try using their speed and close the distance to the German guns. By 1942, reliability of the type slowly improved, thanks to the better quality control in the factories and more experience on their maintenance. But by the end of this year, most of the Crusaders were replaced by Grant and Sherman tanks at the front line, and they were only used for flanking attacks. Despite their problems and the arrival of the stronger Allied tanks, the Crusaders were used until the very end of the African campaign, participating in the Battle of the Maret Line, in Operation Vulcan and Operation Strike. But after the African campaign ended, the Crusaders were only used in secondary roles, as gun tractors or anti-aircraft vehicles. The frontline duties were taken over by the new Cromwell and the American Sherman tanks. The Crusader tank, though it became obsolete quickly, and it had a bad reputation for being unreliable, still held the line despite its shortcomings until the more advanced designs arrived, and it is still one of the iconic vehicles of World War II. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.